Hi everybody, what's up? My name's Sam and welcome back to the channel where currently all of us Time of the Whovians United members are settling down to enjoy Christmas. Like me, who is simply just relaxing with a mug of hot chocolate thinking back on the year just past. Which is why this hot chocolate is mostly vodka. Now, I don't know about you lot, but I love Christmas. The food, the drinks, the music, the celebrating with friends and family, the giving and receiving, and generally it's just a time where I can forget about all the bad things in the world. Until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day, because that's when my family is full of turkey and fast asleep. But what definitely helped make Christmas so special to me as a kid, which is definitely lacking as an adult now, was the annual Doctor Who Christmas special. Russell T Davies introduced these festive episodes in 2005 when he brought our favourite sci-fi show back to our screens, and I hope he brings them back when he returns, because they were scrapped after 2017 when Chris Chibnall took the reins as showrunner, replacing them with New Year's specials, which is fine, just it's not the same. So in memory of our fallen comrades, I'm going to rank all of the Doctor Who Christmas specials from worst to best, in my humble opinion of course. I will say quickly though, I don't think any of these episodes are bad as such, or at least that bad, but let's face it, some are definitely way better than others. Well, obviously Sam, otherwise this wouldn't be a ranking list, would it? Alright, enough waffling, let's kick it off. Now, there are a total of 13 Christmas specials to go through, and we'll be starting off with the very worst, which is Last Christmas. I stick by my statement about none of these episodes being that bad, but oh my god, this one. In the 12th Doctor's first ever Christmas venture, we get a suitably darker tone to fit the personality of this new incarnation, drawing inspiration from the sci-fi horror genre, with clear influences from the like of John Carpenter's The Thing and Ridley Scott's The Alien franchise. This was on track to be a decent base under siege story. However, the episode soon shifts into something I just couldn't take seriously anymore with the introduction of actual Santa Claus. Yup. And his elves. This happened. Yes, I know, it's a Christmas episode, but it's just too on the nose. Imagine in Planet of the Dead, which is an Easter special, if they had just slapped a giant bunny in the middle of the San Helios desert. This is what Last Christmas essentially does. Sure, his being there is explained and it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't stop the darker tone of this episode getting completely shattered by his presence. But in Santa's defense, I do like the way Nick Frost portrayed him for the most part. He just felt a bit out of place. If this were a different episode, I probably would have appreciated him more. But this wasn't all that was wrong. The episode's villains, the Dream Crabs, were a great concept and quite grisly. I mean, come on, they jump from the ceiling, then cling onto your face and then liquidize your brain whilst trapping you in a dream state. That is actually terrifying.
Oh no, my brains.
But unfortunately, the episode ended up suffering from them during the second half of this story. Because guess what, guys? It was all a dream, within a dream, within another dream. Yeah, not very inventive, is it? So in the words of Wham's song of the same name, last Christmas, I gave you my heart. The very next day, I never wanted to watch you again. Nah, it's a bit harsh. It's fine. So, up next at number 12, we have the Snowmen. This episode is guilty of two major offences for me. Number one, the reintroduction of classic villain the Great Intelligence into the modern era was an absolutely wasted opportunity. It's a force unlike any other foe the Doctor has ever faced, and I do think it could have become an awesome reoccurring threat, instead of like the Master and Cybermen again. I think within the story it served its purpose, but nothing more than just a monster of the week. I know it returns in the Series 7 finale, but let's face it, who cared? The second major offence is the Paternoster Gang, and their regular appearances from this point onwards. Actually, that's unfair. Less the Paternoster Gang, more this abomination. You made your species a joke and I hate you for it. Also, I'm not a fan of the 11th Doctor going all My Chemical Romance and refusing to get involved in any strange going-ons because he's a bit sad. Yet again, I'm one of those people that defends the 10th Doctor's outburst in the end of time, so I guess that makes me a hypocrite. There are some positives in this episode though. I do think Dr. Simeon had a good villainous presence, and I actually like the sinister design of the Snowmen. And I think this version we get of Clara Oswald is probably the best one, but unfortunately this is just a bit of a meh and forgettable episode overall, so unless I was doing a Doctor Who marathon, I doubt I would ever put it on. Okay, and at number 11, we have The Time of the Doctor. This is probably the episode I associate with Christmas the least, to be honest. Mainly because it just feels like a massive series finale to wrap up the 11th Doctor's run, and to be fair, this was basically what it was. But despite my criticisms, I do kind of like it. Ignoring the messy and expository tying up of loose ends, this is an enjoyable ride for the most part. But when it falls flat, it really does fall flat. Like the Doctor greeting Clara's family for the first time whilst naked as the day he was born. Then continuing this joke through awkward flirting with a woman we've never seen or heard of before. Like, look at her eyeline. She was definitely checking out his Time Lord tackle there. But whilst the story's pretty meh, it's got some good scenes. The Doctor's last stand handles his death. Actually, you've got me there, that's all I can think of. Wow, I really went into this thinking I like this episode more than I actually do. Yeah, not great, but not terrible, I guess. The Doctor's last stand scene, though, is definitely a stand-up for me. And I really couldn't care less about the stuff with Clara and her family. Alright, coming in at number 10. The Doctor, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Wait, no, that's not it. The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. Putting this episode above Last Christmas. I know, I'm about to get crucified. But you know what? I love stirring the pot and that hateful stew smells delicious. So if you couldn't already tell from the messy title, this episode suffers from a fair bit. Stephen Moffat was clearly trying hard to take a classic tale, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and apply a Doctor Who spin to it. But it just results in something that feels so forced and unnecessary half the time, and it's just distracting. A shame, because there are some elements to this episode I enjoy, including the character of Madge, who is a bit of a badass. Just going to show you don't need to be a gun-wielding maniac in order to be a strong female. Oh wait, yeah. But the grief she carries for her dead husband throughout the episode does create an emotional drive, especially as she's withholding the truth from her children until Christmas has passed, so they don't always associate the holidays with their father's death, only for it to all come out anyway, which all gets undone of course in a pretty nonsensical way because there just has to be a happy ending. And trust me, this is not the only thing that doesn't make sense in this story. And let's not even talk about the supposed threat of the episode. BBC, babes, if you're not going to use Bill Bailey properly, don't hire him. Oh, and the scene when Madge finds the Doctor in a spacesuit with his helmet on back to front is just brilliant. Okay, and at number 9, we have the husbands of River Song. Oh, what am I meant to say about this one? For starters, it's just a bit of non-serious fun, and it commits to this tone. And to be honest, I can't really think of anything to fault about it. That's not me saying this is a flawless episode, by the way, but sitting here now, I couldn't really think of anything to pick at. Maybe, just maybe, the villain situation. King Hydroflax, though goofy and a bit over the top, all in all, he was just quite enjoyable to watch. Plus, he's played by the magnificent beast that is Greg Davies. But when it's just his robot body chopping about and causing mayhem, it's just a bit dull. The best thing about this episode, though, without a doubt, is the Doctor and River song, which surprises me because when we got to Series 6, River was getting a bit, not annoying, but a bit repetitive to me. But I love how for a majority of the episode, River has no idea who the Doctor is, which leads to some pretty funny scenes, and overall it's just a joy to watch them interact with each other. And of course, when River finally realises she's been stood beside her greatest love in his latest incarnation for all this time, we get some beautifully touching moments to follow, namely this entire scene at the Singing Towers of Darillium. So whilst this story is not the best, but not bad by any means, this episode has got some heart, some laughter, and on one final controversial point, a way better chemistry between the Doctor and River Song compared to when Matt Smith was in the role. Fight me. But moving on to number 8 now, we have the Christmas Invasion. Now I can really hear people angrily smacking their keyboards. And to be fair, I do kind of feel bad for putting this episode so far down on the list. But I'm sorry, this episode is just a bit boring. In the entire 60-minute runtime from start to finish, what can you tell me that happens? Don't get me wrong, stuff happens, but when I watched it, it doesn't feel like all that much. Perhaps because this is a Doctor Light episode, this is why I feel this way. Which, by the way, I thought was a good element to this episode. Yeah, sure, it was a bit odd deciding that the 10th Doctor's first ever episode should have him kept up in bed for most of the time, but this was the first time in the modern era that we got to see how Earth deals with alien threats without the Doctor being there. Turns out it's not too pretty. By the way though, this episode's villains, the Sycorax, are just awesome. Their whole space tribe vibe is awesome, and they look awesome, and their technology is awesome, and this guy is awesome, and what they do in the episode is a bit underwhelming. Apart from the leader, right, the rest just sort of stand around and get a bit rowdy. Not terribly exciting stuff. I mean, if I wanted to watch a load of aliens getting rowdy as two oppositions confront each other, I could watch a heated debate in the Houses of Parliament. Other than that though, there are some definite moments where this episode has me laughing. The festive terrors such as the killer tree and the robot Santas, silly and entertaining whilst retaining a genuine sense of danger, and I love how most of this story follows Rose, Mickey and Jackie, who are always a delight. Plus, Harriet Jones. Enough said. Okay, and in 7th place, it is The Next Doctor. I can understand why this is not everybody's favourite episode ever, and by no means is it mine, but I still think it's an enjoyable ride from start to finish. Beginning with the negatives, this episode's title and story is unforgivably baiting. To put into perspective, David Tennant announced that he was leaving the role of the Doctor in 2008. Then, just a few months later on Christmas Day, we get an episode called The Next Doctor. It really does make you wonder why Russell T Davies penned this, but to be fair, this whole premise of an ordinary man genuinely believing he's the Doctor is quite interesting. Just maybe the episode airing wasn't appropriately timed. Aside from that though, I love the Victorian Christmas setting, which has been done since, but I think it works best here. The Next Doctor, aka Jackson Lake, was actually pretty awesome, and I think given the chance, he would have been awesome in the role as the Doctor, the real one. The episode is quite entertaining with some fun and comedic scenes throughout and some good action, but unfortunately the villain side of things is a bit lackluster. Miss Hartigan is anything but intimidating, and when she becomes the Cyber King, she just becomes laughable, especially when she throws a screaming fit when she becomes self-aware and the Cybermen literally cover their ears because she's so goddamn loud. Oh, Gary, she's blowing my eardrums out. Women ain't. Can't live with them. Comedy gold, mate. The Cybermen are the only good thing as far as villains are concerned, but even then they took a step back once a higher power came into play. And let's not talk about these things. Overall, this is not an offensively bad episode, it's just not the best. Alright then, at number 6, we have the return of Dr. Mysterio. I just remember first seeing the trailer for this episode and immediately thinking, Stephen Moffat, you dirty trend chaser. I mean, it's just Doctor Who meets Marvel, innit? But turns out, it's quite a lot of fun. Okay, sure, a basic story, a bit cheesy, but fun. Grant, aka the Ghost, was quite good, fit the bill as a knockoff Superman, and Lucy, Grant's Lois Lane, was also quite good. But I think the standout of this episode was the villains. I'm just fascinated by these guys. Just brains with eyes chilling in jars, inhabiting human bodies, doing weird things with their heads. The concept of their assimilation is quite gruesome, and whilst they're not the most intimidating villains out there, I would actually quite like to see these guys return. But other than that, the New York at Christmas setting is pretty good, and the episode does generally succeed in pulling off a comic book feel to it. Decent episode. But now we are entering our final 5, and in 5th place, we have The Runaway Bride. Can I just say, this is a massive upgrade from its predecessor in almost every way. As I've said, the Christmas Invasion does have its enjoyable qualities, but you can tell it was the first of its kind, as we've never really had a Christmas special since has had the same feel to it. On the other hand though, The Runaway Bride truly feels like a set of format that served as a foundation for future specials. Is this just me? Probably. But nevertheless, this episode is pretty good. I mean, what's not to like? We've got the introduction of the brilliant Donna Noble. It has a cracking soundtrack, humour that never falters, excitement, and all while retaining a Christmas feeling to it. I think the story is good, and it gives us a mystery to solve right from the start. The Doctor and Donna are just great together in their first ever adventure. The only gripes I could really give this episode to though are incredibly minor. It was great to see the Roboforms returning with a bigger presence than their debut, but when we see them as the Rachnos' henchmen with them hooded cloaks, it turned these pretty fun and festive foes into these generic goon types. And this is not helped by their pretty simple design underneath their masks. But I stress, this is an incredibly minor gripe, and in stark contrast, we have the Empress of the Rachnos, which is probably the best Doctor Who has ever offered in monster animatronics. The Empress herself, I thought, was a great villain. A bit pantomimey, but fun, sinister, and of course the design is just fantastic. So yeah, pretty good episode. And in 4th place, it is Twice Upon a Time. I bet you think I'm joking, don't ya? Well, I'm not. I genuinely really like this episode. Sure, it has its fair share of negatives, but the worst offender of all, the First Doctor is now a sexist who can't wrap his head around lesbian relationships, despite coming from a civilization that can literally change their gender. Doesn't make much sense, but I'm glad Moffat decided to disregard all of that for the sake of a joke. And yes, I know I just criticised the Christmas invasion for not having much going on, yet this episode ranks much higher, but this is my list, so shut up. But despite all of its flaws, this episode is one of my favourite specials because there's just so much I love about it. I love the intro. I love the 12th Doctor struggling to accept he has to change. I love that Rusty makes an appearance again. And the soundtrack is especially great. Murray Gold throwing some brilliant pieces that really do heighten the emotion of the more touching scenes. And whilst we're on the subject, the best scene by far is the Christmas truce. This was beautiful. Really beautiful and really well done. And my god, when 12 asks why he can't have peace, just as a gorgeous piano piece starts to play, mate, I cried when I first watched that and it still gets me now. Overall though, a flawed episode, sure, but there's so much to love. Beautiful, touching, and that's my justification for putting it so high on this list. And coming in at third place, we have The End of Time Part 1. Now I bet you guys are thinking I'm just a sucker for regeneration stories, and to be fair, yeah, I am. Oh, and by the way, I'm strictly talking about Part 1 here, as Part 2 aired on New Year's Day, so I guess that technically makes it a New Year's Day special. I think, like Twice Upon a Time, I really like this episode because of the emotional impact it has on me with each watch. I mean, come on, that scene with Wilf and the 10th Doctor in the cafe, that is heartbreaking. Maybe I'm just addicted to crying. But not only that, The End of Time brings a really feral, more insane version of John Sims' Master, and not a lot of people like this, but I personally do. Including the skeletal flashes when he's laughing. It's just creepy. And of course, the stars of the show themselves, David Tennant and Bernard Cribbins. I love these two together. Wilf is just protect this man at all costs. He is too pure for this world. And the relationship he has with Ten is just great. They can relate in ways the Doctor can never do with other companions, and it just makes their interactions extra special. Other than that though, there are just quite a few scenes that are just great. The Doctor encountering the Master in the scrapyard, the Master snacking on some homeless people, the cafe scene, yes, I'm bringing it up twice. Just a great episode all round. Though perhaps the Master's plan to simply turn the human race into him was a bit silly and, dare I say, stupid. But this by no means affects my viewing experience. Okay, let's enter the final two. So, in second place, we have A Christmas Carol. Whereas the Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe took a piece of classic literature and adapted it quite poorly, A Christmas Carol does the opposite. It takes the novella written by Charles Dickens and beautifully applies a Doctor Who twist to it, interweaving the story of a miserable old miser with time travel, alien fish and Catherine Jenkins, and oh my goodness does this work. Though it's not in my top spot, this is probably the first episode I think of when someone says Doctor Who Christmas Special, because it just captures the spirit of the season so brilliantly. Every character within this story carries an important purpose and none of them feel like dead weight. Catherine Jenkins is surprisingly good, the Doctor and crew are great as usual, and the standout, for me at least, has to be Kazran Sardik, the Ebenezer Scrooge of the Doctor Who universe. It is such a joy to watch him change over the duration of his redemption arc. His life essentially being rewritten before his very eyes, and the Doctor ultimately making him a better man by the end of the night, all in order to save the passengers of a crashing spaceship. And then that ending where Kazran is reunited with his lifelong love Abigail, as her angelic voice brings peace and harmony, the snow falling down over their heads, and I just can't explain how good this is. It's just the picture of Christmas. The episode is just perfect. It's just a shame Stephen Moffat peaked with this Christmas special and the rest of his are significantly less impressive. So with all that I've just said, you're probably wondering why this isn't number one. Well, in truth, I can't tell you that. I just prefer the last entry on this list that little bit more. So, what is this episode, I don't hear you asking? Well, Let me tell you, in first place, it can only be Voyage of the Damned. Before I started this list, I actually sat down and looked at some Christmas special rankings online, and for some reason this episode was always pretty low, which I don't understand because it's so good. It's funny, it's exciting, it's tragic, it's sad, and it's wholesome. The setting alone is just so incredibly creative. Space Titanic, I mean, come on! Even before the titles roll in, we know stuff's about to go down. And wow, does it. This episode is filled with some genuinely shocking and unsuspecting moments, such as the deaths of Mr. Van Hoff and the steward. And characters like Mr. Van Hoff, you really do grow to like them throughout this episode pretty quickly, so it's a shame they just suddenly get popped off like that. In fact, all of the side characters are all so memorable to me, even to this day, especially the likes of Mr. Copper. The Doctor as well just has some epic moments. I think you know what I'm talking about here. Just all around, you're constantly engaged, and yeah, it's just amazing. This episode, I just love it. But as flawless as this episode is, it has one flaw, and that is the reveal of the big bad behind everything, Mr. Max Capricorn. This episode has a pretty serious but fun tone throughout, which comes to a complete stop when this oversized lawnmower just wheels out to reveal his plan. It's just silly. I like his plan though, admittedly. No revenge, no lust for power, just good old retirement at the expense of lots of lives. But it's just the way he acts, the stupid faces he makes, and just generally the goofy vibe I get from him. I just can't take him seriously, but maybe that's the point. Especially when it's revealed that he could have cancelled the Titanic's engines remotely whenever he wanted. Like, what? Then why go to the bother of drawing in meteorites and risking survivors that could ultimately ruin your plan, which ends up happening? Oh, it's just dumb. And it just kind of makes the last 50 minutes of this episode redundant, considering he could have, at the snap of his, well, not fingers, but, you know, just made Titanic go, woo, boom. Everyone's dead. Thankfully though, the other antagonists of this episode, the Heavenly Host, are just great. Their designs are perfectly chilling with voices to match, and some of the lines they have just crack me up. I could go on about this episode forever, so I'll stop here, but sure. The Max Capricorn stuff is a little dumb, yeah, but it's such a minor gripe to me that it doesn't affect my viewing experience in the slightest. Everything else in this episode is just so enjoyable, and I always make the effort to put this episode on every year come Christmas Day. A smile on my face and a heart full of joy each time. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, that is my ranking. This was a very fun list to put together, and I do hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and if you did, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button and leave a comment telling me how my list is wrong and how you would rank these episodes instead. And in case you're not already, please do consider subscribing to the channel, but most importantly, from all of us here at the time of the Whovians United, we wish you a merry, merry Christmas. I'll see you in the new year. Bye bye.